On today's show, we're going to take a regular pendant and we're going to supersize it. Let's make some jewelry. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm the WrapMaker, Jim McIntosh. Today, we're going to be making a pendant. Now, I know if you've been following all of our shows, you'll notice that there's a lot of pendants. Pendants seem to be kind of the basic cornerstone of any jewelry maker's work. We love to make pendants. People love to buy pendants, too. So I like to come up with different designs, different ways to make pendants appealing to customers. And that's the key to this week's pendant. We're going to be creating a regular looking pendant, but we're going to supersize it. We're going to add something to it. Now, have a look at what we're going to be making. We're going to take a regular pendant and we're going to add an element that hangs from the bottom. And it's a really simple technique to do, and it's going to be so easy for you to make. And if you stick around till the end of the video, we're going to talk about ways that you can take this supersized pendant and super duper size this pendant. So make sure you stick around till the end. If you're ready, let's start the project. So these are the tools we're going to need. And most of these are very basic tools we've been using in most of the projects. So let's take a look at those. So we're going to be cutting our wire, so we'll need to measure it. So we've got our ruler. We're also going to be holding everything together. So we've got our painter's tape, which is essential. And we've got our scissors. We've got my little scissors today. These will come in handy. Now, we're going to need to cut the wire off the spool. So we need a good pair of wire cutters. We're going to be straightening our wire, and something we're kind of seeing is such a great tool to have are these nylon jaw pliers. These really help smooth wire, especially larger gauge wire. So these are becoming almost essential for the stuff I've been doing. We're going to be marking the wire. We're going to also be marking where we're going to be putting our wraps. So we'll need a fine tip permanent marker. We're going to need round nose pliers. Now we're going to be making a loop. And to get that loop looking good, we're going to use these round nose pliers. So get you a good pair of these round nose. And of course, we're wire wrapping. You can't wire wrap without these. These are our WrapMaker pliers. And these really help make wrapping so very much easier and faster. So make sure you get a pair of these. We're also going to have some rough edges we're going to want to kind of file away, round them out a bit. So I've got a flat needle file. You can get a flat jeweler's file, or just a square jeweler's file is fine. Now, to add that decoration, we're going to need to be flattening some of our wire. So I've got my bench block. This is just a nice little bench block. It's good to have to make flattening the wire easier. And to flatten, we're going to use our chasing hammer. We're going to use this wide part, and we might even use this small peen side, depending on if I'm in the mood to add a little texture to our final piece. Okay, that's all the tools. Let's take a look at the materials. Let's take a look at the materials we're going to need for this. Now, we are going to need a couple of things, but nothing crazy, okay? You should have everything for this. So let's take a look. First, take a look at our wire. We're going to be using 18 gauge square wire for the frame. Now, there's a reason why we're using 18 gauge. Let's take a look at the stone that I'm going to be using. I'm using this cabochon, and it is, see how thick it is right here? This is a thicker stone. So when I'm choosing my wire for my stone, I have to take this into consideration. If you think about the cabochon, if I was to use 21 gauge wire, which I can use, I would use 5 strands of wire. That way I get to cover the sides of the stone. The thickness of this stone will be covered. Or, like we're going to be doing today, I can use 18 gauge square wire. I'll only need to cut 4 strands of the wire, and that will hold these sides in very securely. I don't want my wires to split and cause the stone to be weak. So the sides of the stone need to be held in very tightly. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're making a piece. We'll also need our half round wire. So 18 gauge half round wire. Today I'm using sterling, so some of this may look a little tarnished. I don't get a chance to use sterling very much, but so I've got sterling silver. I've got 18 gauge in both of these, and the 18 gauge square is dead soft square wire. And like I said, at the end of the show, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about how you can learn to add more to the piece, to that dangling area. All right? So that's everything we're going to need for this. Let's go ahead and we'll start the project. First, we need to set up the piece. That's very important. We have to figure out how much wire we're going to need. We're going to have to think about where we're going to be putting our wraps. So on every piece, I'd always do this the same. We're just going to pull off a piece. I'm going to pull off about 4 or 5 inches of this painter's tape. And I'm going to cut a long sliver. I'm going to cut a sliver down the length of it. And we're going to use this tape to set everything up. Now, I'm going to hold on to this because I'm going to use this later. But got my piece of tape here. And I'm going to take the cabochon and I'm going to take it and add the tape from the top tip of the stone. And I'm going to work my way around the stone till they meet up. So here we've got this till the ends meet. And then where they meet, I'm going to trim off this excess wire. So we should have pretty good idea as to where everything's at. We need a fine tip permanent marker. What we want to do is we want to make some marks on this that are going to represent where we're going to putting our wraps. So here's where the tape ends meet. So I want to go opposite. So I'm going to go to the bottom of the stone and I'm going to put a line here at the bottom. Now these are just guides for us. If you've watched those other videos on making pendants, we're doing exactly the same thing we've always done. Now from this center line, we're going to make a line to the left and to the right. And we want to kind of cover the bottom of the stone. So if we look at how wide the stone is, we're going to want to go like right about in here. So the bottom of the stone is covered. So I'm going to go to the left it's about 10 millimeters, and I'll do the same thing to the right. These don't have to be perfectly even. We just want to use these as a guide. Yes, that's pretty good. Now from this bottom, that'll secure our bottom end. Let's go to the other end. We'll do the same thing from the top. Now pretend that where the wires meet, or where the tape meets, is the center line at the bottom. So we're going to go about 10 millimeters to the right and 10 to the left. And that will be the area that we're going to wrap at the top of the stone. So now we're done marking our tape. We can take the tape off of here and we're going to stick it to our work surface just like that. Next, we need to figure out how much wire we're going to need. So we're going to measure this, the length of this. Now look at that. So this is 4 inches of tape that I've got for this stone. Now that's enough wire to get us around the stone, but it isn't enough wire to make any bends on the front and the back to hold the stone in, and it's not enough to make a bail and all of those other things. So this 4 inches, we're going to double that. So that's 8. And then we're going to add 2 more inches for the bail. So that gives us 10 inches of wire. So we're going to cut 4 strands of our 18 gauge wire at 10 inches each. All right, so let's do that. Cut 4 wires at 10. This should just be enough. So there's our last one. There's 10 inches. All right, so we're going to hold on to any of our excess scrap wire there. So now look at our wires. They're all kind of bent and not helping out at all. To straighten these out, I'm going to use our nylon jaw pliers. Now you can use your fingers to straighten this. It's dead soft wire. But because this is such a heavier gauge wire, I do like to use these nylon jaw pliers because they if you, especially if you're new, they kind of save your fingertips. If you're doing a lot of work, you haven't built up a callus on your fingertips yet, this really does well to straighten all of these wires up. So let's straighten our wires. We want them relatively straight. They don't have to be perfect. All right, last one. This is number 4. Just gotta get this straight. You just have to work at it. Be patient. Work just a little bit of the wire at a time. Just gonna set this up just like that. All right. So now that we've got our wires straight, you have to choose one of these wires to be the what we're going to hang things from, because we're going to make a loop at the bottom of the cabochon. So one of these wires has to be used for that very purpose. And you want to kind of figure out also about how big of a loop you want to make here at the bottom of the cabochon. So I want you to find whatever wire you choose. I want you to find the center, and I want you to mark that center with the fine tip permanent marker. So since we're using 10 inches, I'm going to mark it here at 5. And that's just a guide so we know where to make some bends. Now we're going to use our round nose pliers, and we're going to just put this on here. I want to make kind of a wide loop because we're going to be hanging a piece of wire from this, piece of textured wire. And so we don't need a huge loop, but we would like a loop. So bring this around the other side just like this. Make sure you do not twist your square wire when you do this. You want to keep that flat. If you do twist that, you want to kind of grab that with your WrapMakers and just kind of give it a turn just so everything is still flat before moving on. It'll drive you crazy. Believe me, it will drive you absolutely insane if you do that. So let's compare this to our piece. So that's about what we're going to end up with right here. So we want to, they are crossed over one another. We want to uncross them. So take your WrapMakers and put them where you want to start that uncrossing. I'm going to go just a little, just right about here. And I want to uncross them there. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. In about the same place. Just make sure you're bending at the right same spot on both. Looks like I did. Take a look here in a minute. Sometimes looks can be deceiving at times when you're doing this. So, yeah, looks like I got it. Yay, I did it right for the first time. Let's do this. I'm going to bring them both together. All right, so this is what we've got. We got a nice little loop here. This is going to go right here at, I'll do it this way. It's going to go right here at the bottom of the piece. And we can adjust this a little bit as we're going. So now let's incorporate this in with all of the other 3 wires. So we said the setup is going to be the front 2 wires right here. So we'll square them up. We're going to make them even at one end. And then we're going to take the 3rd wire, and I've got the loop pointing away from me. So we want the loop pointing away. So there's wire number 3, and then we'll add wire number 4 to the back. And notice I'm just getting one end of it squared up. And I want to take a piece of painter's tape, and remember those little pieces we cut? We're going to put them across all 4, bring it around, and make a flag so it's taped together, just like that. And we're going to start at that, and we're going to work our way down, and we're going to end up touching the loop. So we want to keep these so they don't cross over, and we'll go past the loop, again, making sure that everything is still squared up And we're going to put another piece of painter's tape on the opposite end. Now notice my wire that's got the loop in it, it is shorter than the other. So you want to go kind of right down to the end there. So we've got our wires put together, and you'll notice things are kind of unwieldy. We're using a lot of wire here. We're using 10 inches of wire. So we're going to want to add a couple of pieces of wires, or a couple of pieces of tape, excuse me. Now, set it a little on here and look at where your tape marks are. And we want to avoid putting a piece of tape where the tape marks are. So I'm going to put one here. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this, if I center the loop here on the middle, see, I don't have any of this piece of tape is not going to be in the way of me wrapping. And we'll do the same thing over here. We're going to add a piece of tape, but I think I want to go right about in here. That's important, just so you don't have to tear tape off and start over again. But there. So make sure all of your wires are flat. They're all next to one another. There. Just like that. Now, take the loop that you just made and you want to center it on your tape. And then take your permanent marker, and I want you to transfer these marks that you made on the tape to the wire. So we got one there, and that's just going to be the other side of that wrap. And then we got the ends. Make this end mark, and I always include the end of the tape in there, so let's add that. And these are just a guide to know approximately where you're going to be adding your wraps. There. So you should now have 3 sections on here that are all marked, and they mimic the tape that you've got here. All right. Now we can go ahead and start our wraps. You don't need this any longer, so you can take that. I always kind of hold on to it till I'm done, just in case I have to remake it. I do something stupid and make a mistake somewhere. Now, when you're doing your wire wraps, we always start in the center. That kind of anchors everything. It makes it easier when you start in the middle and work your way outward. So I've cut a piece of wrap wire here. Got my wrap wire. And I always tell everybody, when you cut it off the spool, it always comes in this curve. Comes off the spool just like that. I always leave it in this curve. There's a good reason. The outside of the curve, this area right here, is the half round. The inside of this curve, inside of the curve is the flat side. We want the flat side against the wire frame, okay? So let's go ahead and make this first wrap. We've got obstacles in the way, all right? So keep that in mind. Well, that loop is in the way, so we're going to have to work our way around that. So take your time as we're doing this. Don't get upset with it, okay? Just take your time. This is going to all work out. So take your WrapMakers, and I want you to put your WrapMakers just outside of where you want your wrap to begin. So you got it right there. And then take your half round wire. You're going to have it with the flat side against the wire frame, and we're going to line it up with that mark there. Once you got it in there and it bottoms out, we want it to bottom out, add just a little pressure to the handles, and then grab the long side and bring it around. So we want to make 1, I might make 2, I want to make 3. It looks like I can get 3 in there. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we've come up to our loop. We're going to take the beginning one, and we want it on the opposite end of the opposite side of the loop. So we'll bring it to the back, just like this, and make sure everything is pushed in there correctly. We got to go past this loop. So I'm going to flip it over to the inside. This is going to be the side up against the stone. And I'm going to make a crossover. So look what I did. Crossed it over just like that. And I want to do one just so I can go to the other side of the loop and I can continue wrapping. So I want to make 4 more here. 2, 3, 4. And I want to end up on the inside of this. So now these marks you can actually see. We're going to remove those with a little bit of non-acetone fingernail polish remover. So make sure everything's good. And once you get it to how you want it, take your wire cutters and we're going to cut the ends off about half the width of this wire frame. I'll push this guy down. Everything's nice and tight. And I'll make sure 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I just wanted to make sure I'd done the right wrap. So now before I remove this, I always do the same thing. This is quite a bit of wire. I can use this for one of these outside wraps. So I'm going to put the curl back into it before I trim it off. And now I'm going to set this aside because I'm going to use that for the next wrap. And now, well, I'll almost cut that again. Push this down. So that's our center wrap. We want to go ahead and wrap these outside ones. Now, remember, we don't want to set these outside ones. The reason why is we use those to kind of make some adjustments so everything is centered around the stone properly. If you set those, they're really hard to move. In fact, they're almost impossible to move depending on how good you set them. So we want to make sure we don't set these. And also another thing is if I'm making 7 wraps on one side, I want to make 7 wraps on the other side. That's important just for symmetry. People probably won't notice. I would notice on my own piece. It would drive me insane. In fact, it has driven me insane before. I've gone crazy over that. Just a couple of tips on doing these wraps. So I'm going to start on this right side. I'm going to set my WrapMakers just outside the area that I want to start. And I'm going to take my wrap wire. I cut my wrap wire. Remember, we kept it in this curve. So the inside of the curve is the flat side. Outside is the half round. I want the flat side against the wire frame. So put it in between the jaws till it bottoms out. Now we're using a long piece that might get kind of heavy on this end, so just kind of work with it. Be patient. Add just a little extra pressure and then start your wraps. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And we want to end on the same side opposite my loop. So I end it on the back. And then since this one's on the front, our starting wire, we're going to move it to the back, just like that. Make sure everything's straight. Now, we're going to trim these ends about half the width of the wire frame. So I'm right here in the middle. I'm just going to push this so it's even, put it down so it's even with the rest, not so it's set, but just so it's even. And we're going to do the same thing over here. But I'm going to keep this wrap wire. I'm going to actually use this on the other side. So I put the curl back in it just so I remember what's the flat and what's the half round. And we're going to trim it about half the width. Just like that. And we'll push this down so it is even with the rest. There. See, now let me show you. This should be able to move. So that's going to allow us to make some adjustments in just a minute. Let's do the other side now. So we're going to set our WrapMakers up just outside of the area we want to wrap. Okay, we're going to hopefully this is enough. It should be just enough. Insert it into the pliers in between the short side. Add a little extra pressure. We're starting our wraps. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Ending it on the back side. And move this guy to the back also. And we'll trim everything off. Now you notice I'm treating this sterling silver just a little bit different than I did with all that copper, because I hold on to all my silver trimmings because I recycle them. I send them back to a company that'll recycle them. They give me a credit for it. and then I can use that credit to buy more wire. So there, we've got both sides wrapped. I'm going to take this inside tape off. We don't need this any longer. I tell you, I wish there was a place that would recycle this tape, because I got tons of this tape all over the place. If I could get somebody to recycle now that would be a good deal. Okay, so this is our finished piece, or our piece to this point, rather. What we want to do is we want to now shape it around the stone. Now, a good way to do this is with a piece of painter's tape. These things can get kind of slippery. So I'm going to take another piece of painter's tape. I'm just going to cut a sliver down it, just a piece down it like that. And I'm going to tape this to my work surface in front of me, like this. There we go. This is going to allow me to shape this how I want it. Now I want to center the loop at the bottom of the stone. Now I'm going to bring both sides around the stone. So one side, and now the other side. And remember, we want the two wires that are these are the front, and then the one wire is the back. So we want to make sure we do that. So center this on there. Make sure everything is centered and on the stone. Very good. And if you have to make adjustments, right now would be the time to do it. Make some adjustments to your wire. So we've got this shaped around here. You want to make sure before you move on that you've got this bottom part here centered at the bottom of your stone. That's important because it's hard to do that later on. So we got this centered. So we can take the tape off of the stone that we've got, set the stone aside, and we can take the tape off of the rest of the wireframe. So what we're going to do is now we need to set up the front and the back of the piece to hold the stone in. And we always start with the back. So I always like to, what I do is I adjust these top wraps so that they're just above the stone. So here's the tip of my stone. I want this bottom wrap to be right about there, where it's almost even with that. And then bring both of them so they're kind of even here. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to show you. See, I just want it just about like this. Because we want to hide this at the back of the stone. We want to hide the tops of these on the back. And that'll make some sense in just a second. The next thing we need to do is we're going to work with our back wires. So I always pull a back wire away. So I get my fingernail in there. I pull it away. Now take your WrapMakers and grab that one wire right here against the bottom wrap, and we're just going to twist this wire toward the center, just like that. And we're going to do the same thing here at the top of that, just below the top wrap. We're going to grab it. We're going to twist it to the center. And notice what it's done. It's made this little area here that's going to hold the back of the stone in. Do the same thing over here. Pull the wire away. Grab it with the bottom. Grab the bottom of the wire closest to this bottom wrap. Twist it to the center. And then do the same thing here at the top, just below the top wrap. We're going to grab it. We're going to twist it to the center. So that's what you have. So let me put my stone in. See, I notice it's not going to move out of place. It's going to be right there where we want it. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to make something for the front so that the front of the stone is held in. That's a design idea for you. That's what you need to think about. The important part is you want to make sure that the entire stone is secured in the piece. Let me explain what I mean. So you want to make sure that the bottom here has some wire over it, as well as that it moves toward the top. Now I'm going to just do a very basic thing here. So these fronts, I always grab the wire about where I want to bring it over the stone. And I'm going to kind of go right about here. All I do is I grabbed it and pushed it in. Then I can refine that shape with my WrapMakers. See, so that's holding that bottom in pretty well. Let's do the same thing over here. About where I want to start this. And this one I just did a little too high, but we can fix that. Let's see. So I'm going to grab the wire. I'm just going to bend that inward. I'll make sure we got the stone in there really well. And you can make these as sharp as you want. You can bend these just a little bit. Don't use too much. Don't spend too much time on this part, refining it, because it's going to move a little bit out of the way, and we can refine it towards the end. But just want to make sure. I don't have this one right where I want it, so I'm just gonna. Okay, that looks good. Now I want to make sure the stone is all the way in the bottom. And all I did was to make sure that initially to make sure I got the stone all the way in the bottom. I separated these out, so it gave me more room here. Now I'm going to put the stone back in, make sure it's all the way at the bottom, and kind of hold it with my thumb, and then I'm going to shape these around again, just like that. And it brings the bottom in. And I've got another trick I'll show you in just a minute. Now, you want to make sure that you've got coverage here at the bottom, as well as the top of the stone. So if I bring these in like this, say I've got all this coverage here on the entire front of the stone, it's going to hold it securely in place. Now, the final resting place for these top wraps, we want to cross them over one another at the top, and I want to bring these top tips. So the top tips of these, I want them to kind of touch at the center of the stone. So I'm going to make some adjustments. That's why we left these open like this, so we can move them so that everything is centered. So I'm going to hold these together, and I'll notice everything should be centered. The top wrap and the bottom wrap should all be centered on the stone. Once I get those where I want them, that's when I'm going to set them. So now we're going to set these in place. Set these ones aside over here in place. So nothing is going to move out of the way. And that's what we've got. We've got our wires crossed over one another. We want to uncross them. So just above the top wrap, I'm going to bend that outward. I'll do the same thing over here. Bend that outward. Now we're going to bring them together. And I want to line up the two sides so that they're even with one another. What do I mean by that? Well, we're going to be wrapping right here. So we want these to kind of be squared up next to one another. And that takes just a little bit of doing sometimes. We're just going to make some adjustments. Remember, we're using dead soft wire. Even though this is thicker wire, this dead soft wire will still move for us. There we go. And we're going to secure the top with another piece of painter's tape. So aren't you glad you cut a bunch of this painter's tape? It made all these little pieces of you can use as flags. So there, got those together. And you want to, I like to make sure everything's together. So I'm going to hold it above those wraps. And I'm just going to kind of wiggle it back and forth just to get everything pulled in tightly with one another. I do have a tiny bit of space here at the bottom that I'm not really all that happy about. We're going to fix that in just a minute. But what we want to do now is we want to wrap this area right here. We're going to be making a very secure wrap on here so that nothing is loose and moves out of the way. So let's grab another piece of wrap wire. All right, so to wrap this top section, we're going to use our WrapMakers. Now, our WrapMakers, if we put this over here, puts a huge gap here. That's not going to hold the wire in. So I always come over here to the side, and I grab one of these wraps, the top wraps, and then I'm going to take my wrap wire. I've got to cut another 8-inch piece of wrap wire, I think. Going to insert it here, line it up kind of where I want to start my wrap, add my pressure, and then start my wrap. I'm going to wrap 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now notice I started the wrap with the front of the stone facing upward. And I'm going to have my wires begin and end at the back of the piece. See, they're both coming out the back. So we're going to do a double wrap on this. We wrap these wires together. We're going to make a bail and then wrap them again. So push these down so that everything's right here. And then you can set this first section. Give it a good setting. Remove our tape. And then separate the wires. So we're going to separate, we're going to put 4 on each side again. So just take your time. This can be kind of confusing because these wires all kind of look the same. And they all look like they should be on a different side than they are. So just take your time and separate these back out. See, like this one, it looked like it was supposed to be on the other side. And this one, now that one looks like it's supposed to be on that side. I think I got it. Now you can always tell, if you look down the top, you can always tell, look right in here, if one of them is in the wrong place. And it looks like we've got all of them how we want them. So the front wires, this front wire from each side, we want to keep in the center. And the rest of them we want to move down here horizontally. And these are going to become the bail. What we're going to do is we're going to curve the bail in between our wrap wires right here. We're going to then incorporate the bottom of the bail wire in with this wrap. Now that'll make sense in just a minute. Now we're going to use bail making pliers for this. So let me grab my bail making pliers. And I'm going to use this right here. These are 6-step bail making pliers. I'm going to use this right there. I'm going to just position it where I want want it to begin, and I'm just going to push it over. And you can use a pen. I could put my Sharpie in there and use that to make this. But I've got my bail making pliers. I'll just use them. So I need my bail. And I want you to see everything on my bail. This is where it intersects right here. Everything from this intersect point to around this curve here, I want to keep rounded. Everything below this intersecting wire, I want to be flat against this wrap. So I'm going to position my pliers where it intersects. I'm just going to close this loop. Push this down. So notice everything, here's the intersecting wire. Everything above is still curved. Everything below is up against this. Then we're going to continue wrapping, but I'm going to wrap from here down towards this little tail here. So just make your wraps. We're overlapping that first wrap. Just take your time. There's a lot of things in the way, so if you just be calm about it, it'll all work out. You can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. Trust me. And here's our last one. So now they meet up. See, they're right next to each other now. And we can set this outer wrap also. And to secure the wrap, we're going to twist these guys together. I'm going to cross them over one another, and I'm just going to twist them. And then you can kind of whip this a little bit, make that wrap just a little bit tighter. Make sure you've got it set really well also. This one wire was not set well. All right. There we go. Now, we've got a little pigtail here. We're going to push that toward the top of the bail. And we're going to trim it. So you only want to have a couple of twists in here. So I'll trim it. Notice how short that is. That's a real tiny little end. Now, we want to cover this up because it's kind of sharp. So we're going to grab these 2 wires that are sticking out from from the bottom of that wrap, and we're just going to bring them up toward the top of the piece. So it's going to cover that wrap. And I want to trim these kind of short. I want to trim them so that we can bend them into that wrap. It's always good to It's always good to cut too long than to cut too short and then end up having to fix things even more so. That drives me crazy when I cut too short. Remember, I say it all the time, you can always cut more wire, like I'm going to be doing here. I say you can't add wire. So we just want it just a little bit, trim just a little bit more so that we can push this over that little pigtail and kind of hide it so that it doesn't cut anybody. So you should be able to run your finger there and you're not going to get cut by that. Because just think about that. It's up against you like this. It could snag what you're wearing. It could, if you don't have anything here, it could kind of cut you or scratch you. So we don't want that. So let's make sure we've got this pushed all the way in. There we go. And fix your bail a little bit. Now, remember I said we had just a tiny bit of space here? I'll show you a little trick to get rid of that space. If you take your WrapMakers and you put the tips of them right here at the bottom, at the bottom here of these wraps, and you squeeze these wraps in toward each other, it pushes the stone down a little bit. See, so that took a little bit of that space out of there. Just kind of play with it. This is just a good way of making some minor adjustments. The other thing we want to do is we want to look at this, make sure these front wires are where we want them. Make those adjustments. There we go. Okay. There we go. This is what we've got. This is our piece so far. The last thing we want to do is we want to figure out what we want to do with all these extra wires that we've got here at the top. I always get rid of one from each side. So I've showed you this trick before, but I'll show you again. Hold the piece at a 45-degree angle and then wiggle the wire back and forth. This is a heavier gauge, so it might take a little bit extra to kind of get this there. But it pops right off. And we'll do the same thing over here on this other back one. I'm going to grab it. I'm going to wiggle, 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 wiggle till it pops off. Like I said, this is there. Heavier gauge wire takes a little bit extra time. Now, what we've got left, we've got 2 wires on each side. We're going to make just a little design here. I'm going to do something kind of simple. Not going to be too terribly complex, but only because I don't want you guys to sit here and watch as I'm moving this wire. But I'm just going to use my fingertips. Just going to make a little curl here. And I'll trim off some of this wire so it's on the inside of that curve. Okay, and we'll take let's use these. Our unveil making pliers, and we're going to just kind of do that. And this one, I'm going to bend it around the top. And we will, let's do this with it. Let's make it flat. And then I'm going to bend it towards the back. I'll trim off some of this wire. Now I want to make sure that these ends kind of get tucked away. So I'm going to just bend them into a curve like that. See how I've got it? So it's bending back into the, towards the bail. And I just want to do that. See, that's all I've done. I've just kind of made just a simple little thing. Now, the last thing we need to do is we've got this nice loop here at the bottom. What are we going to do with it? That's what we need to decide. We need to decide what we're going to do with that. Now, very simple thing to do is we're going to just hang a wire from it. What I want to do, though, is I want to kind of widen this out just a little bit. So I'm going to take my WrapMakers. I'm just going to pull this apart just ever so slightly. I'm just going to kind of make some adjustments here. And make sure it's straight. I'm going to show you something really, really, really easy to do with this. I'm going to use some large wire. I'm going to use a piece of 14 gauge round wire. 14 gauge. That's going to be nice and big. But we're going to just use a hammer to add something to this. And it's a very, very simple technique that you can do to finish this piece off. So let me grab my 14 gauge wire. Here we go. Look at the size of this stuff. Whew. That's some big wire we got here. 14 gauge. So we're going to cut a piece off of this. We have to determine how much of a dangle, I guess, we want. So if this is the bottom here, how far down do I want it to go? Let's start with 1 inch. So I'm going to cut a piece that's about 2 inches long because I want to be able to do some work with it. It's just make it easier to do some hammering and put some texture out there. So a 2-inch piece of this. And now we'll use our bench block. Now I've got my bench block on a cloth. You can buy a sandbag for this. I put it on a cloth. I just want to dampen the noise. That's what I want to do. So I want to straighten my wire out as much as I can. This is a very heavy gauge wire, and so it's very difficult to flatten out. So just use these nylon jaw pliers to just kind of make some subtle bends here and there, just to get it straightened out. All right. Bench block and a chasing hammer. Now, I'm really, really, really good at smashing my finger with a chasing hammer and a bench block, okay? I'm really good at it. So let me show you what I do to prevent me from smashing my finger. I hold it by the end, and whatever I'm going to be hammering, that's what's on the bench block, and I keep my fingertips off the bench block. That will help you so that you don't end up smashing your fingers and crying and throwing tools around your studio and acting like a big baby. If you use a little bit of safety, trust me, it works. So, got it on here. I'm just going to tap on this. Now, as I'm tapping this, as I'm hitting this, I'm doing two things. I'm flattening the wire, I'm making it wider, and I'm hardening the wire. So keep that in mind. The more you hammer on the metal, the stiffer the metal gets, the more brittle it becomes. You don't want to overwork your metal. You don't want to overwork the wire. And you don't want to get it paper thin. All right? So just going to hammer, and I'm going to hammer the tip more than I am up here. I kind of want it to taper off. So I'll tap bottom of it quite a bit. So I paddled it out. And then the rest of this, I'm going to just flat ever so slightly. Like so. Now, it's kind of curved on me, so we want to fix that. And notice the end is not rounded. It's kind of squared up on me. So take a file and just round this end just a little bit. Take some of the rough edges off. I'll see how I'm doing this here. And this side. And just take your rough edges off, round this off. Just a little more on this side. Okay, good. Last thing I want to do is I think I want to add a texture to this. I'm going to add it using the ball peen side. I'm just going to randomly hit this. Now keep in mind, this has now become the front. Yeah, I want this part showing. And as much or as little texture as you want. Just want to make sure. Yeah, that would be good. All right. And, oops. There. Just wanted to straighten that out. And I think I want to add a little bit more to this. So I'm going to tap a little bit higher. All right, so that's all the texture, excuse me, that's all the texture we want to add. Now, we've got to be able to hang it on the bottom here. To do that, you can either use your round nose, which is what I'm going to use. I've got too much here, I think. So, I'm just going to bring it around this, just like that. And we're going to trim this. Again, trimming too long rather than too short. So trim just a little bit more. Just keep looking at it till it's trimmed right where you want it. Because what we want to do is we want to close this off. So there, I closed up that loop. Now I'm going to bring it back to center. So I'm going to put my pliers back on here. I'm just going to grab the bottom half and I'm going to push it the opposite way, and that will center that center our loop, and then we're just going to close the loop up the rest of the way. Well, actually, no how. We got to hang this thing on here, don't we? So open this up just a little bit. So I've just off-centered it, and I'm going to feed it on there, and then close this up so that nothing moves. And look at this. We've just got a nice long piece of jewelry, and we can add more to this bottom loop. We can add more pieces of wire that we've flattened and trimmed at varying lengths to give us a nice piece. So this is what we've ended up with. This is one of my very favorite projects because there's a lot of things you can do with it. That's exactly what the point I'm going to make right now. Next week, next show, I'm going to show you several different ways you can add texture. You can add different things to that. I'm going to give you some ideas what you can put on there from that loop to make the piece even better. Even better. So we're going to take it super size and we're going to super duper size that project next week. Make sure that you tune in to watch that one because we're going to have a lot of different ways we can do that. So it's going to be fun. Now, also, I wanted to let you know, I'm going to put my email address right here below. If you've got questions, email me. If you have ideas as to what you'd like to see, maybe you'd like me to make a certain piece of jewelry, or maybe you're having some difficulties creating a certain piece or getting around a problem you may be having, let me know. Let me know what projects you'd be interested in. Maybe there's projects that are jewelry related but aren't making jewelry. There could be some things there. But whatever your ideas are, please email me. Let me know what you'd like to see, and we will do our very best to bring that right to you. Remember, we're in this together. We're trying to make a show for you, so it's beneficial for you to learn how to make and even sell your own handmade jewelry. All right? Well, thanks for tuning in. I'm the WrapMaker, Jim McIntosh. And again, I tell everybody, if you want to make good jewelry, you have to practice, practice, practice.